When I was growing up, I remember very little from the sex education I received. Maybe it was because the sex education I received was so very little. I remember my fear about catching HIV, and that is probably the only thing I remember from sex education. Fear. Did it stop me from having sex? No, it didn't. But the fear followed me for some time, along with the idea that sex was mostly for boys to enjoy, but for girls to provide. As a girl growing up in one of the safest countries in the world, I also remember how afraid I was to walk at night past bushes, because that's where I believed all the predators hid, because that was a story we were being told. It all started 6 years ago when I was teaching nature science to 13-year-old kids. And I thought to myself that I could easily take 3 lessons without being behind on our subject. While it turns out that 13-year-old kids, they have a lot of interests and many questions related to sex education. So these 3 lessons did not cover the topics I had in mind, and an undeclared amount of sex education was taught this semester. Fortunately, my boss had faith in me and believed in my vision about the importance of sex education. I was just as convinced that sex education would not be satisfactory without taking gender inequality, power and privilege, and societal views into the equation. That resulted in a weekly lesson for all students from the age 14 to 16 in my school. My students shared my views about the importance of sex education, and together we managed to reach the ears of politicians. And from now on, sex education is mandatory in all 8 elementary schools in my hometown, Hafnarfjörður, for that particular age group. From an early age, children explore and discover their sexual identity, and they start to compare themselves to others. They start to compare themselves to others without being judgmental. They just see how amazing, how different we are. And they start to compare themselves to others without judging them. They just see how beautifully different human beings can be. And how amazing is that a person is born without prejudice. Prejudice is 100% learned behavior, and that tells us that it can 100% be unlearned with the right information provided. And sex education is a lot more than teaching kids about sexual intercourse, STDs, and how to prevent pregnancies. Because even when they are young, we can provide them with age-appropriate sex education, like the correct names of body parts, their value, the importance of respect for the diversity of human beings, bodily autonomy, and how amazing our bodies are. That is sex education, and no, it does not increase sexual activity. Let me tell you why I think sex education should not be taught without gender studies. Social construction is a cultural phenomenon that affects us all. It teaches girls to be passive and boys to be tough, and in some ways, aggressive. They are the doers, but the girls are the thinkers. The gender system is rooted in our culture, and it puts us in different places when it comes to power and privilege. And that leads us to power imbalance, which is the key element in violence. Gender-based violence is a real problem, and sometimes I wonder if we can ever get rid of that problem. Gender-based violence has a tremendous impact on people's sexuality and health in general. We live in a world where parents, fathers especially, are worried to death about their little daughters and all the predators out there. We teach them many ways possible on how they can avoid circumstances that put them at risk for violence. Don't get too drunk. Don't wear revealing clothes. And don't walk alone at night. But why don't we teach those possible predators how not to be a threat, how not to be the sole perpetrators of violence, and how to respect women and minorities? Gender-based violence is not an unchangeable part of our existence. It's a learned behavior of the gender system, and it has been ongoing in most societies throughout recorded history. Technology has made a great impact in changing history, and in many ways for the better, but digital reality is becoming the biggest threat against sexuality and sexual freedom. 98% of Icelandic kids from the age of 9 to 18 own their own mobile phone. And porn, as a sex education, is a reality that young folks face. Studies are showing that young folks are turning to the digital environment as a key source of information about sex. And that's what happens when we adults don't give them the right information they need. They need the research-based information, and the information about what they're seeing is probably not what to expect when they start to have sex with another person. Porn suggests that it's okay to humiliate, hit, spit on, and even choke our partner. It promotes that incest is desirable, it normalizes pedophilia, and it glamorizes sex with minors. We just call it violence against a child. Porn does not promote the importance of consent, the conversation about what we need and what we like and what we don't like. And on average, Icelandic boys are 11 years old when they see porn for the first time. So we can assume that many of them have been watching porn for 2, 4, maybe 6 years when they start to have sex with another person. And I think we all agree how ludicrous it is that they use that as a guideline for their first experience. But 2 recent Icelandic studies have shown that porn has an impact on expectations related to sex, and that boys especially seek information and ideas about sex from porn. Iceland has been leading and on the top of most lists related to gender equality. We had the first elected female president, we have a female prime minister, and the Bishop of Iceland is a woman. But gender-based violence is a real problem, and sometimes I wonder if we can ever get rid of it. Stígamót is an NGO that works with survivors of sexual violence. Last year, they welcomed close to 1,000 survivors of sexual violence. And you might think that it's not that many. But looking at a country with a population of just over 390,000, it is a significant number. Sometimes I hear that it wasn't so complicated. And Iceland is also supposed to be queer haven. But we are seeing accounts of queer people being brutally attacked for the sole reason of being different. We are now facing a wave of hate speech and hate crimes against queer people, especially trans people. And sometimes I hear that it wasn't so complicated in the good old days, that now everyone is seeking attention by coming out of the closet. Well, no, that's not the case. We've just moved away from total banishment of queer people from their families and from the society. And we have also moved away from laws that made being queer illegal. Just like we don't have more people being left-handed. We just stop tying their left hand down and force them to use their right one. According to researchers, it can reduce suicidal thoughts tremendously for trans people if they have only one adult who respects their preferred pronouns and gender. And imagine, we all have the opportunity of being that person. Studies also show that sex education, which is not inclusive of members in the queer community, is less effective. It just doesn't get through to them. Unfortunately, it is a sad reality that almost after each lesson about violence, there is a student who comes up to me and tells me about their experience about violence or their friend's experience of violence. It's a sad and also grateful position to be in, that I get to be in those kids' healing process. And I believe that if we teach kids all the aspects of violence, they are less likely to force violence upon others. But they're a lot more likely to tell us and seek help, and therefore they have greater chances in dealing with the consequences. According from stats from Stígamótum, 70% of those who sought their help were under the age of 18 when the assault took place. And with that in mind, it is simply too late to teach them sex education when they are in college or for them to learn by doing. We need to start early. Sex education, without being inclusive of members in the queer community, is also less effective. And the myth about the predator hiding in the bushes is usually not the reality, because researchers are showing that it's the most common threat is someone you know and you trust, like your friend or your boyfriend. I believe that if we teach kids, starting from a young age, sex education, we will increase their communication skills, self-esteem, and general well-being. And I believe that if we start early, they have the courage in a world where you can be anything, to be themselves. Let's not make the fear and the shame that we got from our sex education prevent them from getting the sex education they want and need. Let's meet their rightful demands instead of hiding behind the thought of discomfort. They deserve better.